In this video, we're building a header from Dribbble so you guys can see exactly what goes into making something this creative. First, we'll take a look at the Figma file where I completely redesigned it using autolayout, and then we're gonna take a look at Webflow and see exactly how the pros do it. Let's get into it. So here we have this design that I grabbed from Dribbble, and the link to the actual Dribbble post is gonna be in the link in the description, so go ahead and support this creator. But this is a screenshot of a hero header from Dribbble, and you might look at this, the first thing that you're gonna see is how on earth would you rebuild this using actual CSS, using Webflow, using something like that? How would you do this, right? What are the divs looking like? And how can I even get started with something like this? Well, what I did to start the process is I took it into Webflow and I recreated it using individual frames and autolayout. So this is what the frames would look like in this case. So if we take a look at the design itself here and we put it right under the design here, maybe a little bit further, we can see that the frames itself actually match the content of the screenshot. So in this case, this might have only been done using groups, using frames, not necessarily with Webflow or autolayout or anything CSS related, but we're gonna rebuild this using Webflow. So I managed to go ahead and rebuild everything using autolayout, and if we do Command Y, we can see how everything is constructed using autolayout. I'm gonna go into the layers here so we can see how it's done. And this is super critical because when we go into Webflow, these autolayout blocks essentially tell us what we need to be doing in Webflow and how we need to be structuring it. So for example, our layout here, the main layout, is made up of 3 different sections. So we have the wrapper of the content itself that is holding absolutely everything, right? Then we've got the top content, then we've got the lower content, and then an absolute div or auto layout block, if you want to call it that. Now, I recreated some of these texts here. This isn't 100% the same, but I manually wrote this natural sign here so I could maybe get it close to what it should be. But the point is to explain how the Webflow layout would be done. So without further ado, let's jump right into Webflow and we can see how we can take this auto layout design and plug it into Webflow. Let's get started. So to get started in Webflow, the first thing that I'm going to add is going to be the nav bar and then the content itself. So if I just rename this to nav, we can see that we can start from there. But before doing all of that, what we actually need to do first is going to be to add a wrapper or a div block and then style it as a wrapper. And then this can be around 10% padding on both sides, something like that. So then now anything that we add inside will be constrained within that wrapper. So you can see that there. So we have the nav and then the content itself. And I'm going to structure it exactly like how I have it in Figma. So you guys can see exactly how important it is to have all this content filled out first in Figma. But let's get started. So we have the nav bar and then we've got the content. So the content, as I said, is made up of 2 different parts, top and lower. So we can go ahead and add, so this can just be content. Then we can add a few more divs here. And this can be top. This one is lower. And this one is text. If I can spell, text content. Okay. So the top here is filled up of 3 individual containers. So we've got the top left, the image, and then the paint. So the top left is very similar to a very simple div with a flex box. So we get started with that one first. So we've got the top. We can add a new div in here, which will act as our top left. This can be top left. And then we can already add the flex box here. So it can be horizontal and then justify to be aligned to the center, something like that. And I've already imported some of the images here so we can see exactly what we need. And that's going to be the coconut. We're only using natural products and 100%. Okay, so it seems like we need another div in here. This one can be called coconut. Okay, let's go ahead and add an image. We can pick the right image here. And then we can just add a simple text block. And I'll worry about the actual content a little bit later, but just in terms of styling, we need to get this right first. So we can make this smaller just using the dragger and another text block in here. I can take a quick second here. Okay, so now we've got the top left already built. This side right here is already done. So now we have to go ahead and close this, we can close that, and we see top left, image, and then paint. Paint is referring to this little smudge in the corner here, and if you take a look at the actual files or the images that I've created from this screenshot, it's not going to be exact, but for this purpose, it's totally fine. So we've got top left is already done. Then we have this image here. We can go ahead and just add that with a simple image. And we need to make sure that it's in the correct div. So top left, right, image, go ahead and select our image. Click on the right one. Okay, so that's obviously a little bit too big. And if we want to get to the right size, this looks like around 50% of the width. So we can call it main image, something like that, 50%, and it reduces in size. So we can justify it to the left and to the right so that the content goes to both sides, just like we want it here. And then we can see that top left should be holding, let's go ahead and move that up here. Top left can be only for the left side. And then top can be, there we go. So that makes more sense. Okay, we can move that to the right side. And then this can be adjusted to the top, to the bottom here. Okay, starting to make more sense. Okay, so we've got top, and then this one can be aligned to the top. There we go. That makes more sense. So then what we have here is going to be, if you get rid of this space here, this is essentially what we have, right? Except for the styling, we've got the content, which is coconut, top left, the image, the main image, and then that acts as our top, right? So if we go ahead and reduce all of this, except for this little paint here, which we can add that now, but that is the main components of the top part. So let's go ahead and add that little smudge, and we can see that in the screenshot. We already have it there, but let's go ahead and just add an image. We can choose the image to be the correct one, which is this paint. And the way that we're gonna do this is going to be with the absolute positioning. So we can go ahead and do that. But we need to make sure that our top is relative. So let's go ahead and do that. Paint. Okay. So now the sizing is a little bit off. So let's go ahead and do something like 40 pixels, maybe a bit more. Okay. Okay, so you can see that just by using the slider here. Okay, that's good enough for now. So now that we have got the top, let's go ahead and worry about the bottom. So the bottom is quite similar, or the lower. We've got two components here, one which is the accent image, and another one which is the content itself that has a very simple stacked design. So we've got a heart, text, and a button. And this one is just an image, text, text. Okay, let's go ahead and worry about the left one first. We can go ahead and make this justified to each end. Okay, so then let's go ahead and take a look at how we're gonna build this, okay? So if we take a look at just the auto layout, we can see that, and if we imagine that every auto layout block or auto layout frame is a div block, we can see how we're gonna build this. So we only have one, so there you go, just add one, just like that, div. And in here, we can start to add in our images. So Flowly here, reduce that in size. We can add in our heading. So this looks like an H3 or something. And then a new text block, new product line. Cool. And then the same thing here. How are we going to build this? Okay, we can see that there's one and then there's another one. This is the button, so we can ignore that. That can be a button. So we've got one div block, an image, text, and then a button. So let's go ahead and add that. Another div block, image, choose image, which is the heart here. We can add the text block and then finish it off with the button. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about styling. I mean, okay, we can add a little styling to this one. So let's see, it's got to be all black and a lot of radius. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Something like that. Okay. The names of these, we can go ahead and call it accent image 2. And this one can be accent image 1. Now these are just arbitrary names. You can call it whatever you want. But for this case, it's totally fine. And we can see that the spacing here is 24 pixels. So we can go ahead and enable Flexbox here, vertical, align it to the left. And in rows, we can add 24 pixels. So it copies the exact same thing here. And I'm going to start playing around with the styling just so we can move a little bit faster here. So inter, regular, and 24. Okay. I don't think we have inter here, but we can go ahead and use Arial, which is close enough. But this can be 24. 24. Okay. Let's go ahead and put in the right text. And for the text to start wrapping correctly, we can see that we want it to be a fixed size of 328 pixels. Okay. The fixed size is fine, but in terms of pixels, it'd be better off if we use something along the lines of maybe 30% of the parent div, something like that. And we can see that that works pretty well. And then for height, we can do 1.2, which is going to be a standard size in height. Okay. Okay, so now that looks a little bit better. We can start to play around with this as well. They're only using natural products, not that fake stuff. Okay. And we can probably just use the same text here. Okay. So this can, again, we can manage the width using percentages instead of the, a little bit bigger. Okay, that can be 40, or it looks okay. Okay, so this image seems to be a little bit bigger, so we can play around with that. Okay, so now that we have this stuff going on here, let me move this up. We can see how this is looking compared to the original image. All right, so now all we need to do is add in the natural and fill every skincare routine. So we can go ahead and add in the images that we've used, and we're going to use the same exact process. I'm just going to put this back in here using absolute, so we can see how we're going to do this. Okay, so we've got one frame, one auto layout frame. We've got an image or the text or whatever you want to call it, and then the big text block, which is going to be, in our case, the H1. So we can go ahead and just copy this. So we've got one big div, the image, and the text block. Okay, so we've got the big div, which is already there, text content. So we need the image, which I need to go ahead and export really quick. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. So we can see that that's starting to look a little bit more similar. Okay, this can be our heading, H1. I'm just going to copy in the information here. Okay, so now we see that compared to the text, this text is obviously much bigger, but it is also fully caps. So to go ahead and change that, I'm going to give it a class. We can go to more type options here, and we can capitalize so that it stays capitalized no matter what you write on it. So we can add any letters and it'll just stay in caps, which is great. Okay, so then for here, we can use width to be around 30% or something, fill, maybe even less. I'm just comparing how many lines are available. But once we add in maybe like 8 REMs, something like that. Okay. So if we get the actual text size, it's 122. So if you do 122 divided by 16 REM, it'll give us the correct REM size, which is fine. So for this case, we want to give it a text to be just like the version on Figma, something like that. And then this looks like it needs some margin on top, so we can give it maybe 5 REMs, something like that. Maybe a bit more. Okay, this looks like it's a bit big for our case here, so we can use something like that. Okay, so the text should be on top, so we can go ahead and give it a relative positioning, and we can move it just like this. So now we've got the natural fill everyday skincare routine, but the text is obviously, it needs to be on top of the images instead of just as a regular div. So we can go ahead and use the exact same method that we use with the paint. We can create a absolute, okay, and then we can move this up. We need to change this to be closer to what we want. Go back into the text block, move it back up. Now you can do this using pixels, using percentages. I'm going to use percentages here just so that we're staying consistent. So the top can be relative in this case. Go into our content and we can do something like this and then move it down. Okay. So now we've got a pretty similar design to what the dribbble post would look like. So now all that's left to do is going to be to add the nav bar here, and I'm not going to get too deep into the nav bar, but if we can see that, if we just start adding a simple div block here, we can start to play around with what the nav bar should look like. Now we can add in our logo here, which will just be a very simple link block. And as the background image, we can choose the logo that we have, and it can cover or contain it, no repetitions, and be in the center, something like that. So now this link can always be the link block that you want to manage to go home or to go to wherever link that you want. So in this case, we're just going to choose home, and then we can choose which way we want to have these links as well. So we can go ahead and create a div inside of our nav. So we can call this nav, and this should obviously be flex block or flex box. And okay, so let's go ahead and add these and then we'll be done with it. But the point is that text link, okay, so the point is that we can get pretty close to what we need in Webflow if we just follow the same exact formula as Figma with the auto layout. Now it's pretty simple to do, and there's a lot of other tutorials out there on how you can achieve this with auto layout, but the main thing is just following the blocks, the frames, making sure that everything is correct within the framing, the pixels, the left, the right, the alignment, everything. You just need to follow the same way that it's baked into Figma. Okay, I'm just gonna add a quick image here. Text link. Okay. Something like this. Blog. Okay, so now all we need to do is go into here. And I'm just going to export this quick line here. Okay. Now, an easy way to make sure that the lines are an equal separation is going to be to add a flex block, flex box, and then we can add one REM. Okay, this needs to be a bit smaller. So we can do something like 1 REM or 2 or 3. And the link also needs to be centered correctly. And before you know it, we have, okay. Let's go ahead and add the logo here instead of the background link so that we can actually see it when we publish it. Okay, so the wrapper, we can also give it maybe a 3% padding on top. Okay, so that is a pretty easy transformation from Figma itself, just by following the blocks, the nav bar, just by following how the frames are aligned, how the spacing is aligned. So if you wanted to add the cart here on the right side, all we need to do is add in another nav or another div and make sure that the spacing is equally aligned so that everything is aligned. at an equal distance. The cart would be a simple div block again. So if you wanted to repeat the same process, it would be another div, the cart, which would be a text block, and then an image, or if you are building a SaaS, then it would also be its own functionality. But that is a pretty over-the-top example of how you can go ahead and build something this complex using Webflow, using actual CSS components. And I'm just going to finish the content here. So organic skincare, just so we get everything as it should be. Something like this. New product line. Okay. Okay. So you might be wondering, okay, we've got this done in the desktop version, but what would you do on, first of all, the larger breakpoints, and second of all, in mobile, right? So for that case, in terms of the larger breakpoints, what I would say is keep the padding at an equal distance. So when you go up into the larger breakpoints, you know, make sure that the design stays the same, because this is obviously not a standard type of design. So you don't want it to be, you know, growing and shrinking with the breakpoints, or maybe you do, you know, especially if you've got things that are an absolute, it might be harder to keep that in track. But see, for example, in the larger breakpoints here, it might just be easier to do this and have the text itself be REM, so that everything is scaling at a proportioned rate, but you want it to still be within the exact design that your designer spent all the time into, you know. And then in mobile, well, that's a completely different beast. If I was going to redesign this for mobile, that would be a completely different video. And we take a look at all the components, make sure that everything is scaling properly. But for this video, in terms of the desktop breakpoints, that is how we would do it. Make sure that the padding fits the design in every breakpoint so that it scales proportionately. And we can see if we are in the lower breakpoints, obviously it doesn't make sense. But as we scroll up, things can start to constrain themselves a little bit more. And we can also do with REMs if we wanted to. So just to keep everything nice and constrained. So guys, I hope that this video was helpful. And if you guys have any questions about anything in the process, how maybe I got this to be on the left side, or how this image was brought in, or any type of questions that you guys have, make sure you leave them down below and I will be sure to answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.